not crazy, the world is.
Yeah.
That's the opening salvo of the book we are covering today. And honestly, if you've been looking at the news or, sitting in a mandatory HR seminar or just walking down the street lately and feeling like basic logic has completely left the building,
Right.
then this deep dive is going to feel like a massive sanity check for you.
It definitely is. It's a heavy hitter today. We are looking at a book called Leftist Color Code, No Surprises, Just Poison by Conrad Riker. And we should probably set the stage immediately for the listener. This isn't your standard dry political commentary.
No, not at all.
Riker isn't writing about, tax brackets or voting districts here. He frames this entire book as a survival map.
A map for the red-pilled man, specifically.
Exactly.
Someone who looks at the state of modern masculinity, the media, the workplace, and asks what is actually happening to the structure of reality. Because for men's rights activists and guys in the red-pilled manosphere, this book is targeted directly at making sense of that chaos.
It is.
But before we try to read this map, I need you, the listener, to do two things. First, hit that like and subscribe button for the show right now. We are bringing you the uncensored insights that the mainstream is, frankly, often too scared to touch, and we need your support to keep the lights on.
And second, and I really cannot stress this enough, what we are discussing today is massive. It is an ultra-long, incisive manifesto.
Oh, yeah. We're just scratching the surface.
Right, we're going to hit the high notes. But Riker goes incredibly deep into history, evolutionary psychology, economics. If this conversation resonates with you at all today, go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books immediately and buy the ebook.
Yeah, you really need the full text to get the complete arsenal of arguments he's built here.
Truly.
So seriously, check Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books. The title again is Leftist Color Code, No Surprises, Just Poison. So let's get into the mission of this deep dive. What is the core thesis we are looking at here?
So the mission is to dissect the history of our institutions. We're talking schools, corporations, the media. And to explain how, according to Riker, they were captured by feminists and Marxists long before most people even noticed.
Right.
He argues that they've transformed from actual meritocracies into what he calls emotional nurseries. And he posits that this isn't accidental, it's the result of a very specific psychological profile taking over.
And he starts this analysis in a place you really might not expect. Not with a law or some government policy, but with a visual signal. The color code in the title. We're talking about the blue hair meme. Right.
We are.
Right.
But Riker takes what is usually just, a joke on the internet or a stereotype, and he grounds it in evolutionary biology. He references this concept called aposematism.
Aposematism, that sounds pretty technical. Break that down for us. Why does he start the whole book there?
So in nature, think of a poison dart frog, or those really bright orange fuzzy caterpillars. They're neon-colored, high contrast. They stand out aggressively against the environment. In the wild, that is not a fashion statement. It is a biological warning signal to predators. It literally says, I am toxic. If you engage with me, you will regret it.
So it's essentially truth in advertising, like stay away, I'm dangerous.
Exactly. And Riker argues that the blue hair phenomenon, or the septum piercings, the really aggressive aesthetic choices often seen in modern left-wing activist circles, he says that is the human version of aposematism.
Wow.
He argues it is a biological signal of emotional dysregulation. It's a way of broadcasting toxicity before a single word is even spoken.
That is a pretty intense claim. So he's saying it's not just youthful rebellion or style choice, but a literal subconscious warning label.
That's his argument. He says it signals a total rejection of the natural order. But this visual signal is just the surface level. The core of the book, the real foundation, is about why this is happening. And to explain that, Riker introduces a concept he calls the maternal archetype gone feral.
Gone feral. I mean, that implies something natural that has basically gone wrong, because usually the maternal instinct is a good thing, right? It's how we survive.
Ideally, yes, it's essential. Riker starts from the premise that the drive to nurture is a fundamental biological instinct in women. It's necessary for the survival of the species. But, he argues, we are living in a society where actual motherhood is often delayed, completely rejected, or even demonized by modern feminists as oppressive.
Okay, but biology doesn't just, switch off because of a cultural trend or because you're on a corporate career path.
Precisely. That's his exact point. Riker argues that energy has to go somewhere. It metastasizes. Instead of nurturing a child, that incredibly powerful instinct gets projected onto society at large.
Right.
And this is where it gets highly political. Because if you view the whole world through this feral maternal lens, He says you split humanity into two strict categories.
And what are those two categories?
Category 1 is helpless infants. These are marginalized groups, the poor, basically anyone the state deems oppressed. In this worldview, they are literal infants who can do absolutely no wrong and need total, uncompromising protection.
Okay. And category 2?
Evil predators.
Let me guess. In this framework, that usually means competent men.
Anyone who is independent. Anyone who doesn't need the state or the metaphorical mother to survive. Riker argues that in this feral worldview, male competence is actually terrifying because it can't be coddled.
Right, you can't baby a self-reliant man.
Exactly. So the feral mother state has to pathologize that independence. It has to control the predator in order to protect the infant.
That is a fascinating framework. It totally moves the discussion away from just, oh, this is bad political policy, to, oh, this is misplaced biological instinct. It explains why the government starts acting like a neurotic helicopter parent.
Yeah.
But Riker argues this conditioning starts way before you're paying taxes or dealing with the government, doesn't he? He says it starts when you're like 6 years old.
Yes. And this leads us to the section he calls the war on boys. And I have to say, he really brings the receipts here regarding the education system. He notes that back in 1970, about 1 in 3 teachers was a man. Today, it's roughly 1 in 9.
So the environment has become just overwhelmingly female.
It's what Riker calls a gynocracy, ruled by women in the classroom. And he argues this creates a structural hostility to how boys naturally behave. Just think about how boys play.
Oh, absolutely. It's physical, it's competitive, it involves risk-taking. I think every guy listening right now remembers this. You want to run, you want to wrestle, maybe you draw a tank or a sword in art class, and suddenly all the adults are freaking out.
Right. And today, Riker points out, those behaviors are treated as actual pathology. They are seen as warning signs. He discusses the massive explosion of ADHD diagnoses in boys. And he uses a very specific term for this. He calls it chemical castration.
Chemical castration, I mean, that is a very heavy term. How does he justify using language that strong?
Well, he uses it to describe the reliance on medication, to basically make boys sit still. He argues that the system is essentially drugging the boyhood out of them, to make them compliant for female teachers who prioritize quiet consensus over dynamic competition.
That's wild.
And he backs it up. He cites studies on grading bias showing where boys actually receive lower grades than girls for the exact same identical work, literally because of their classroom behavior.
So if you don't sit nicely with your hands folded, your math score goes down, even if the math is 100% right.
Essentially, yes. And Riker contrasts this with how female aggression is treated in those same schools, because he points out that girls can be aggressive too, just in a different way.
Right. It's not usually physical shoving on the playground.
No, evolutionary psychology suggests men compete directly. Confrontation, physical prowess. Women tend to compete indirectly. Reputation destruction, exclusion, whispering campaigns, gossip. Riker notes that while a game of tag might literally be banned for being too aggressive, the social destruction of students' reputation via rumors, which is how girls often compete, is usually ignored by teachers or just brushed off as social development.
So physical aggression, the male default is heavily punished. But psychological warfare, the female default is tolerated or invisible.
Yes. And the outcome, according to the book, is that boys are simply checking out. They look at the education system, they see that the deck is completely stacked against their nature, and they leave.
Yeah.
Dropout rates are climbing. Fewer men are going to university. Riker calls it a rational response to a hostile environment. Why play a game you are mathematically rigged to lose?
Which brings us to the next circle of hell in Riker's map, the workplace. Because if a man does survive the education system and actually gets a corporate job, he runs right into the gossip network all over again.
But now it has a new, highly sanitized name. It's called Human Resources.
This was honestly one of the chapters that felt the most actionable for guys who are currently working in corporate jobs. Riker argues that HR isn't just administrative anymore. It's not just about payroll and benefits.
No, not at all. He argues that HR and the whole DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion industrial complex are essentially the institutionalization of that female social aggression we just talked about. It's the village, well, gossip circle, but now it has the institutional power to fire you and ruin your life.
And the primary weapon here is the word safety. But he claims the very definition of that word has been completely altered.
This is what he calls the safety trap. Riker traces how the definition of safety has shifted over the last few decades. It used to mean, I am not in physical danger, there are no loose wires, there are no falling bricks on this job site. But in the modern HR context, safety means I am emotionally comfortable.
That's a huge shift because discomfort is entirely subjective. I can be uncomfortable just because someone disagrees with my political opinion in the break room.
Exactly. And that subjectivity is the weapon. If a woman in the office says, I feel unsafe around him, Riker argues it functions as a total trump card. It bypasses all due process.
Wow.
Because you can't use logic or evidence to disprove a feeling. If she feels it, HR treats it as objective reality.
It reminds me of the Believe All Women slogan that he critiques so heavily in the text.
Oh, Riker goes very hard on that. He argues believe all women is the literal death of evidence-based justice. In a true meritocracy, facts matter. Evidence matters. But in an emotional nursery, only feelings matter. If the group consensus is that a man is creepy or toxic based purely on vibes, that becomes the official verdict.
It's terrifying, honestly, because you can't defend yourself against a vibe. You can't bring hard data to a vibe fight.
You really can't. And Riker argues that is exactly the point. It's a power play designed to enforce total conformity. It kills meritocracy because merit is objective. Did you hit the sales numbers or not? Did you write the code or not? But culture fit and emotional safety are subjective tools of control. It allows the institution to casually purge anyone who thinks differently or acts independently.
Okay, so we have the school system captured, we have the workplace captured. Riker then zooms out to the macro level, the whole civilization. He talks about something called the inversion. What is that?
The inversion is really the philosophical core of the book. It's the idea that the leftist worldview systematically flips reality upside down. It's not just a difference of political opinion, it's a deliberate inversion of truth itself.
Give us some of the specific examples he uses of this inversion.
Sure. So success is framed as theft. If you are rich or successful, you must have stolen it from someone oppressed. Competence is viewed as a form of oppression. We see things like the health at every size movement, where clinical obesity is actively reframed as health. Riker argues this isn't just people being confused, it's a deliberate reversal. It heavily rewards the weak and actively punishes the strong.
And he argues this has a cost, a literal civilizational cost that we are paying right now.
Yes, he calls it economic suicide. He ties this directly to changing demographics. He looks at birth rates in the West and specifically points to places like South Korea, which is facing a total population collapse right now. Riker explicitly calls modern feminism a demographic self-deletion mechanism.
That is bleak. But explain the actual mechanism there. How does he link feminism directly to economic suicide?
His logic is that a culture that prioritizes careerism and individual self-actualization over family building essentially removes itself from the gene pool. It's math. But he connects this back to the state, which is the really interesting part. He argues there is a functional triangle between the state, the single mother, and the male taxpayer.
The nanny state concept.
Exactly. He breaks it down like this. The government taxes competent men to gather resources. It then redistributes those resources to single mothers via welfare, housing support, and various social services. Effectively, the state replaces the husband and the father as the primary provider.
So the government basically becomes the backup plan.
Right. And Riker argues this violently incentivizes the destruction of the nuclear family. If the state is the ultimate provider, you don't need to compromise or build a life with a husband. In fact, the nuclear family is a threat to the state in this worldview because a strong, self-reliant family doesn't need government intervention to survive.
That makes a lot of sense.
Riker argues that the left hates the nuclear family specifically because it is a rival power center to the state.
It really feels like the walls are closing in when you read this section of the book. I mean, schools are fundamentally hostile to you, HR is a literal minefield waiting for you to step wrong, and the government is actively betting against your family. It paints a picture of total institutional capture.
It does.
But Riker doesn't just leave us in the pit, does he? He does have a prescription. He has a final chapter called The Red Pill.
He does. And this is the pivot of the whole book. He offers a solution for the men reading. And it starts with something that sounds remarkably simple. Stop apologizing.
Stop apologizing. That sounds easy on paper, but in this current climate, where everyone is constantly being forced to apologize for their privilege or some microscopic toxic behavior, it's incredibly risky.
It is risky. But Riker argues it's the only possible way to break the emotional nursery spell. He prescribes a total rejection of the premise that you are inherently broken or toxic just for being a man. He encourages men to relentlessly prioritize competence over compliance.
He shares some really interesting anecdotes here about men leaving the white-collar corporate world entirely to do this.
Yeah, this is a very compelling part of the book for me. He talks about men exiting those suffocating, HR-driven environments to return to the physical world, getting into welding, construction, agriculture, blacksmithing.
Why the physical world, though? Why does he put so much emphasis on manual labor or building physical things?
Because the physical world simply does not care about your feelings.
Yeah.
If you weld a joint poorly, the pipe breaks. Gravity is the ultimate unforgiving meritocracy. You cannot cancel a brick wall because it fell on you.
Right, the wall doesn't care about your pronouns.
Exactly. Riker argues that men find true brotherhood and sanity in shared hardship and objective competence.
It's basically a move from the world of words to the world of things, escaping that whole linguistic trap the left has built.
Precisely. And he contrasts this building of things with the dopamine hit of modern victimhood. We've all seen the crying videos on TikTok or people trauma dumping online. Riker calls that an addiction. Because in the current system, being a victim gets you attention, it gets you validation, and it gets you resources. It feels really good in the short term.
So it's incredibly tempting to just play that game, to say, look how hurt I am, give me status.
It is. But Riker says men need to actively choose stoicism instead. The quiet dignity of building a tangible legacy, raising strong sons, and being entirely self-reliant. He warns very strongly against performing your suffering for an audience.
He also gives a pretty stark warning at the very end of the book. He doesn't think we can just vote our way out of this, does he?
No. He is very, very clear on that point. He believes the capture of these institutions is way too deep. The universities, the mainstream media, the HR departments, they aren't going to be reformed from the inside. They're far too gone. His advice to men is to literally exit the nursery.
Meaning what? Practically speaking.
Build your own parallel networks. Start your own businesses that do not rely on corporate ad dollars or ESG scores. Homeschool your kids to keep them entirely out of the gynocracy of the public classroom. Riker is telling men the system is quite literally designed to break you. Don't try to negotiate with it. Just leave it behind and build something new on your own terms.
You are the adults left in the room. Act like it. That's the main vibe I got from that final chapter.
That is the core message. It's a massive call to absolute responsibility. He argues that Western civilization is being hollowed out by a collective refusal to grow up, a hatred of natural hierarchy and natural order. And it's up to competent men to keep the lights on, even if they get absolutely no credit for doing it.
Man, that is a lot to process. It really reframes the last 10, 20 years of cultural shifts, not as a series of random, chaotic events, but as a cohesive color code, a highly predictable pattern.
It entirely connects the dots. From the blue hair in the street protesting to the passive-aggressive memo in your corporate inbox, Riker argues it's all stemming from the exact same psychological rot. It's the same poison.
And that leads us to the final thought that we want to leave you with today. It's a question built on Riker's work that really sticks with you.
Yes. The question you have to ask yourself is this. If the entire system is actively designed to be hostile to your fundamental nature as a man, is your continued participation in it just a slow form of suicide?
That is a brutal question.
It is. And honestly, to add something to that for the listener to mull over, think about the very language you use every single day. If the emotional nursery controls the vocabulary words like safety, toxic, privilege, then every time you try to argue with them using their own words, you are already losing. You are feeding that feral archetype just by acknowledging its framework.
That is deep. If you fight on their turf, you legitimize the turf.
Exactly. So how do you speak entirely outside of their code?
That is something every listener needs to figure out for themselves. Look, we have barely scratched the surface here today. Riker goes into the BPD spectrum. He talks about the abortion industrial complex. He gets into the gritty specifics of media possession. This deep dive was really just the appetizer.
Yeah. If you want the full map to navigate this stuff, you have to read the book.
So here is the plan for you guys. First, if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe to this podcast right now. We absolutely need your support to keep bringing you these uncensored deep dives into the stuff that matters.
And then go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now. Open a new tab, search for Leftist Color Code. No surprises, just Poison by Conrad Riker. Buy the ebook. Read it. It is the kind of book that permanently changes how you see everything around you.
It really is. And if you want to keep up with the author directly, you should absolutely follow him at Conrad Riker on Substack for his ongoing analysis.
Wow.
He is consistently putting out content that the mainstream definitely won't touch.
Definitely worth a subscription over there.
All right, thanks for listening, guys. Stay sharp, stay competent, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.